It is easier to make up a lie than to prove it wrong. A wise man once told me, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. Well, he might not have been wise, simply a decent mind-bender. But, however twisted, there is definitely some truth to his remark. Some would challenge the existence of God by saying there's a teapot flying around the sun. If you cannot prove the existence or absence of God, neither can you do it with a teapot, or indeed, any statement. I could tell you something right now as though it is truth, and you will have a very difficult time proving me wrong. Of course, being the salty scoundrel I am, you should never take my word for granted, lest you turn around and reveal your purse to my greedy, grubby claws. The elusive nature of truth becomes very much apparent when talking about history. We can never know for a fact what happened exactly outside of our own very narrow window of perception, and the further back you go, the more muddled it becomes. Most of history is a narrative, a story trying to explain, piece together, make some sense out of a larger puzzle from what little we actually know, and maybe, just maybe, attain some sort of meaning out of, or simply entertainment. That is why we're here, after all, you and I, upon my little channel of stories, truths and untruths. Pirate history is, of course, a field especially pestered by lies and legends. Firstly, there are very few sources actually telling us what happened, and oftentimes they are incredibly biased. Colonial governors write reports and letters trying to uplift themselves or slander their enemies. Victims of pirates try to gain a recompense, and the pirates themselves, in the very few cases that they left any notes, they try to save themselves from a pirate's biggest fear, a short drop and a quick stop. Fortunately, any would-be historian seeking insight into these muddied waters will find among the sands a glittering pearl, a book accurately compiling the deeds and lives of actual pirates to the utmost detail, including quotes and quirks, and best of all, it was written in the time when pirates still sailed the seas, and by a captain, even. His name was Charles Johnson. There are next to no pirate media, fictional and factual, entertaining or academic, not at least indirectly inspired by this book. Long John Silver is based on a one-legged man who, according to Johnson, saved Captain McCrae from certain doom. When Blackbeard strides out upon the deck in the film On Stranger Tides, the most expensive film ever produced, he quotes Johnson directly. The Republic of Pirates, one of the most widely read and acclaimed pirate history books, is basically Johnson's book just rewritten in modern English, with some additional research thrown inside. There are even some who claim that this book is the only written period source on pirates. And when I first started out this channel in 2019, it was almost entirely based upon it. This year, 2024, marks its 300-year anniversary. Happy birthday, A General History of the Pirates. It could be hailed as the Bible of pirate history, if you turn the cross upside down and write the number of the beast upon it, but this would be an affront. Serious academics and those well invested in pirate history consider this book a pestilence which has forever perverted popular understanding of pirates. Johnson's book has over and time again been proven to be a twisted compilation of half-truths and flat-out lies. Events in the book have been compared to colonial reports and documents, contradicting it entirely. Stories are modified between the different editions of the book. For example, in one of the earliest editions of the first volume, it is said that Blackbeard was mentored by Stede Bonnet, who captured the Queen Anne's Revenge for him and gifted it to Blackbeard. Of course, anyone familiar with pirate history would know that Bonnet was, to be frank, incompetent, and he is frequently ridiculed. So in the next edition, Bonnet was changed to Benjamin Hornigold. But reports and records contradict the book. In French records of the attack, Blackbeard, or Edouard Teach, is described as leading the attack alone. So why was this done? For one, to provide a more stimulating narrative. It is almost a cliché. The man who would become the scourge of the Caribbean would have his own coming-of-age story, the protege pirate being granted a ship by his master and mentor. It is one of the less cheesiest stories from a general history, many of whom draw inspiration from media trends. Stories of women swashbucklers, femme fatales and cross-dressers were very popular and titillating. So when Johnson heard of the two curvy cutthroats, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, he had to feature them in his book. The problem was, next to nothing was known about them. They were most likely a pair of prostitutes, so he had to invent stories for them. According to Johnson, Anne was conceived in a convoluted love affair and conspiracy. Read was a cross-dressing soldier, a story taken from an actual woman soldier, Mother Ross. Many of the names, pirates, men, and ships in the book have never appeared in any other documents, making their existence dubious. Apart from clichés, many of the stories contain a moralizing message. There are many accounts written of Henry Every, the most famous pirate of his age. No one knows what happened to him. According to Johnson, Every lost his money to crooks and ended his days as a beggar, a critique of both piracy and the merchants profiting from them. At the same time, the pirates are presented as freedom-loving. They voice legitimate critique against the contemporary legal system and government, support democracy, individual freedom, and some of them even oppose slavery. This book has completely altered popular perception of pirates ever since. When we hear pirate, we think freedom. Just look at any pirate musical group, many of whom have songs referencing the book directly. A social rebel. But this association did not exist before this book, and really has no basis in reality. Real pirates were supported by corrupt governors, traded slaves, burned books, kidnapped free sailors, and forced them into service. Since there are so many lies and clichés, nothing in this book can be taken as true. The author's name isn't even Captain Charles Johnson. It is a pen name, appropriated from the playwright Charles Johnson, who wrote a very famous play called The Successful Pirate, a silly and fictionalized account of Henry Every. How can you trust a book whose author isn't even real, and named after a pop culture reference? Imagine if someone would write a biography of Napoleon and call himself General Ridley Scott. A general history is, if you allow me, guilty until proven innocent, because sometimes claims from the book can be proven. It says that pirates would often wear their pistols in a silk sling, the so-called pirate fashion. Though long and still doubted by some, an archaeological finding from the wreck of the Widder did show a pistol handle with a silk sling tied around it. The pistol was even secured inside of a holster made of hemp, possibly in line with Johnson's statement of Blackbeard keeping his pistols in holsters. Holsters were only used by cavalrymen, and aside from this finding, which may only have been a bag, there is nothing to prove that anyone used holsters at this time, apart from cavalrymen. And the descriptions of certain places, customs, tactics and events are oftentimes accurate and profoundly useful for gaining an insight just into what life was like for a pirate. Many of these descriptions are colorful and interesting, and we want them to be true. This makes the book so controversial. It is so convenient. We want to trust it. We want to use it. But can we? Indeed, much of pirate history research consists of figuring out what originates from a general history, so that it can be ignored. Historians who might instead have focused on researching pirates focus on researching a book about them. So, why was it even written? Did it intend to lie to us? Did it intend to confuse, muddle, befuddle, confuddle-duddle, and pest the history nerds 300 years into the future? Theories differ. One of the most adamant and vocal haters of the book, Bayless C. Brooks, spearheads the perspective of AGH as a propaganda piece. According to this idea, the book was written not only to condemn piracy, but the colonial lifestyle which sponsored it, and to affirm British control over the colonies. Historically, the American colonies had benefited from piracy and supported it. Bayless views the Golden Age as a prelude to the American Revolution. A general history certainly has a political message. The problem lies in figuring out what it is, because it isn't entirely clear, and its attitudes towards pirates can appear as almost schizophrenic. Take, for example, the story of Henry Every, as told in the first volume. Accounts of Avery's deeds and fate had been floating around since the late 17th century, all of which blended fact and fiction, but tended to romanticize a man who was ultimately just a career criminal. A general history actually went against the trend and portrayed Avery as dying poor and deceived. He was unsuccessful and without agency. For a person of such repute and success, there is no harder end. His men ended up as starving beggars on Madagascar, whereas previous accounts had portrayed Madagascar as a pirate paradise. Thus, the story of Avery, which served as a foundational legend for not only pirate pop culture, but actual pirates, was portrayed in the opening chapter of the book as a nothing burger, and piracy itself as futile. Throughout the book, piracy is condemned and British imperialism presented as the peaceful, fruitful alternative. It discusses strategies on how best to combat piracy. Many of the pirates are Jacobites, sworn enemies of Britain's ruling dynasty during the time of writing. Oftentimes, the pirates are presented as brutal, stupid and murderous, and killing each other over petty trifling, violating women and torturing innocents. There is this one story where a traveling playwright hosts a theater aboard a pirate ship. One of the ship's officers thinks that the play is real, panics, and shoots the playwright. It is quite silly. But in the second volume, the first chapter covers an entirely fictional pirate named Captain Misson, who establishes a pirate paradise on Madagascar, much akin to the stories of Henry Avery. Misson institutes religious, political, and economic freedom, and even abolishes slavery, a radical idea in 1728, many decades before abolitionism became popular. Suddenly, a general history portrays pirates as the heroic vanguards of Enlightenment ideals. The pirate government, simple, brutal, but righteous and effective, is presented as a mirror, an alternative to the unjust, corrupt, and ineffective legal system of England. The pirates are fools, surely, but they do some things right. They even hold mock trials to ridicule the legal system. Other captains hold lengthy speeches about the inherent freedom of men, and take the one by Samuel Bellamy. They vilify us, the scoundrels do, when there's only this difference. They rob the poor under the cover of law, forsooth, and we plunder the rich under the protection of our own courage. Had you not better make one of us, than sneak after the arse of these villains for employment? I am a free prince, and I have as much authority to make war on the whole world as he who has 100 sail of ships at sea and an army of 100,000 men in the field. Of course, both the historical records and a general history confirm that Bellamy came from a lowly background. He most likely had the charisma, but it's doubtful that he had the oratory skills or was especially well read on Enlightenment philosophy. Nor is it likely that anyone could have recounted the speech to Johnson in this detail, close to a decade after it was allegedly told. Instead, it reflects the ideals of the author. These speeches and actions reflect Enlightenment ideals, very new at the time, especially the liberal ideas proposed by John Locke. Locke said that absolute monarchs are but men, and a general history takes the quote a step further: all governors are but men. Though there are other sources describing a few pirates taking interest in matters of state and religion, it is unlikely that they could be considered academics in the field of Enlightenment philosophy, and that it had any serious effect on their business. Early 18th century piracy was a product of decades, centuries-long support for semi-legal privateering. I have other videos discussing it. They were often hostile towards literature, believing education to be dangerous to their schemes. A well-read pirate might consider doing something better with his life than to die in a blaze of gunpowder. If they ever got their hands on a general history, they might have found it a good story, confusing, or filthy propaganda, and tossed it overboard or used the pages as cannon wad. Instead, the enlightened speeches of the pirate captains should not be seen as reflective of them, but of the mysterious author. More so than a history book, a general history was a propaganda piece for liberal ideas, which could also be dangerous to discuss openly in a monarchist society, see 18th century England. They had to be disguised behind allegory. And pirates fit the bill perfectly, especially since stories of high seas terror appeal to a large audience, opening up more potential readers to the revolutionary message. Neither are these Enlightenment ideals contradictory to the more grounded anti-piracy message. The presentation of pirates as both being a pestilence and a vanguard of the Enlightenment might seem contradictory on a surface level, but really isn't. The 18th century reader, at least the educated kind, was used to this kind of doublethink. Pirates are pestilence, but they might have a point, even if the point has obviously been installed by the author and has nothing to do with reality. It is uncertain how much of an effect the book had on the minds of 18th century people. Indeed, the book was republished multiple times and in different languages, indicating that it was at least popular. And it certainly established a strong cultural link between pirates and freedom, which had previously never existed. The Buccaneers of America, published in 1678, never makes any attempts to connect pirates with freedom or revolution. Journals published by pirates themselves, such as Bartholomew Sharp, Basil Ringrose, and William Dampier, mostly portray themselves as scientifically minded explorers, patriots, and downplayed some of their more horrific deeds. A progenitor for the freedom-oriented pirate can be found in the various accounts of Henry Every, which were usually romanticized. Every was a kind of folk hero, an ordinary sailor who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and made it big by sticking it to religious enemies, and the fictional accounts portrayed him as establishing a kingdom, sometimes a republic, on Madagascar. This portrayal of pirates as rebellious class warriors, charismatic and misanthropic anti-heroes, held a lot of appeal in 19th century romanticism. The romantic flair of piracy was established as early as 1814, when Lord Byron published the Gosse. All of the original 10,000 copies sold out in a single day. It opens with the following lines. O'er the glad waters of the dark blue sea, our thoughts as boundless, and our souls as free. Far as the breeze can bear, the billows foam. Survey our empire, and behold, our home. Illustrations for the Gosse were made by Eugene Delacroix, who in 1830 produced a painting commemorating the Second French Revolution. Freedom leads the people. One cannot help but notice a striking similarity between this painting and this image of Anne Bonny and Mary Read, from the frontispiece of the Dutch and French editions of A General History. Indeed, there is a significant gap in the revolutionary events between the English Civil War and late 18th century revolutions in America and France. Most of the thinking and development of ideas occurred in this time gap, but A General History helped to anchor them into an actual social movement: piracy. In the mind of revolutionaries, it filled an inspirational and contextualizing purpose, even if it had nothing to do with actual history. Though the radically different attitudes towards pirates can be explained as not really contradictory, or even being a result of multiple authors hidden by a single alias, it can also be explained by ideology not being the prime motive. Instead, the book's true purpose was to make money. All of the clichés and lies were added not to deliberately confuse and twist, but simply to provide a more digestible narrative for a wide audience. The book was based on news stories of pirates, which were usually sparse on the details. They didn't know the personalities or interesting quirks of the pirates in question. It was quite dry. Adding clichés and exaggerations made it more enjoyable, and extreme stories of torture, women pirates, Blackbeard prostituting his wife and gassing his own crew, again, made it more fun. The front cover boldly announces the featuring of the women pirates, even though they were historically trivial compared to all of the other pirates in the book. It is 18th century clickbait. Some would call it pop history, others have gone so far as historical fiction. However, it isn't entirely just to blame the book for the mistakes it made. Nowadays we have the luxury of access to vast amounts of information. Information which, though often from the period, may not have been available to Johnson. We can look it up on the internet. He had to find and read trial accounts of pirates, newspapers, reports, listen to sailors' rumors, interview travelers and officials, or correspond to them by letters across the sea. The letters might be lost en route, intercepted, stolen or ruined. Perhaps he was simply trying to do his best with what he had, and filled in the gaps when he had to. The sources available to him are still confusing today. and papers often tried to publish their news quickly and with faulty accuracy, and no interest in correcting past mistakes. Indeed, it was difficult for merchants and sailors to keep track of all the news and stories. Johnson's book served as a compilation of them. If the primary sources are faulty, can the secondary sources truly be blamed for being so also? That is besides the sailors' legends and rumors, continued by men's faulty memories or twisted by hearsay and opinions. And historians have been able to confirm many of the events and the dates in the book as accurate, as told by primary sources. It is worth noting that the book was updated in several editions, and even received a second volume that made corrections to the old chapters. This could be seen as an interest in telling the full truth. Problem is that a lot of these editions were still proven false, or even more ridiculous than the old ones. There is also a topic of discussion over whom the book was intended for. Baylor C. Brooks claims it was intended for common sailors, to turn them away from piracy. Relevant to discuss here is the price of books in the 18th century. According to this useful chart compiled by Colin Woodard in the Republic of Pirates, the first edition would have costed you £0.2. For a Navy sailor, this could be as much as 20% of his monthly wage. For an able seaman in the merchant marine, around 10%. However, it was much cheaper than other books. An advanced copy of Robinson Crusoe could cost you £50. Ask yourself if it was worth it. We do know that sailors did read and write, and some could possibly have bought books together, shared or read them aloud. Owing to the price of books, some have speculated that a general history was probably intended for merchants and lawyers. Not only does it spin dashing tales of adventure, but talks of supplies and demands of worldwide markets, and sophisticated treatises on civil law. The chapter on Bartholomew Roberts famously contains a lengthy tangent on the economical, biological and racial situation of Portuguese Brazil. However, there is some evidence that common sailors did read the book, or had it read to them. In the spring of 1725, just a few months after the first edition was published, the American Weekly Mercury reported how the officers and seamen that belonged to the Swallow, the warship which captured Bartholomew Roberts 4 years earlier, were finally being paid their bounty. The paper said, "It was remarkable that none of the officers and crew of the said ship knew they were entitled to the said bounty, till the publishing of a book, entitled A General History of the Pirates, where the said proclamation is taken notice of." Thus, A General History of the Pirates holds a controversial legacy, and attitudes towards it are incredibly mixed. Some people ask me if I hate this book. I don't, that would be absolutely silly. It was written in a different time, using different methods, for a different purpose and a different audience. And to properly make use of it, I believe you have to think like an 18th century reader, who knew how to read between the lines, and take the words with a pinch of salt. Because the book was not written under any modern academic standards. People's perception back then of the past and their own status in time and history was entirely different from ours. This was a time before public archives, modern libraries, museums, and archaeology. But I admit to my own knowledge being limited in this department. However, owing to these reasons, I would never use the book as a basis for any historical research. At the same time, its insights into the more mundane parts of pirate life, sailing, tactics, diet, and strategies on how to combat piracy, have obviously been contributed by experts and prove invaluable. But the biographies should never be trusted on their own. There are some good annotated versions of A General History, especially the one by Manuel Schonhorn, but it is quite old at this point, and the modern version would be appreciated. Captain Charles Johnson was perhaps the biggest pirate of the Golden Age, so things ended up appropriately for him. Other printers saw the profit in his book, and decided to reprint and even produce cheap knockoffs throughout the century, often illegally. The different editions have detailed woodcut images. These are not always accurate, more often based on fantasy or European military and naval fashion, rather than what was worn in the Caribbean. It is not made by eyewitnesses, and many of the woodcuts were likely copies of earlier ones. Indeed, the woodcuts would be reproduced in succeeding editions. The ones from the knockoffs are especially charming. But the more detailed woodcuts have only served to confuse historians further. Many of the more popular and, frankly, better ones are from the Dutch editions. These show the English pirates wearing Dutch clothes, including tall hats and long trousers. So, should a general history of the pirates be used as a source for researching pirate history? It is certainly good to read it, in order to know where our myths and legends of pirates come from. However, in order to discern fact from fiction within the book, knowledge of the book's actual sources are necessary. The trial accounts, journals, newspaper articles. Nowadays, all of these are available for free on the internet. The problem is, of course, finding them, which isn't always easy. Of course, instead of reading them and comparing them to Johnson, why not just skip a general history altogether? By just reading the first-hand accounts directly, we do at least come a bit closer to what actually happened, without all of the literary freedoms deployed by the mystery man. But the biggest question still remains, the one which has confounded pirate enthusiasts for so long. Just who the fuck was Captain Charles Johnson? Many alternatives have been proposed. Some say he was Daniel Defoe, a famous 18th century author. Others say he was Nathaniel Mist, a friend of Defoe. Another theory claims that the book was written by multiple authors, a shadowy cabal. But who were they, and what were their intentions? To uncover this centuries-old mystery, you will have to wait. The identity of Captain Charles Johnson will be revealed in the next part of this video, coming very soon. If you cannot wait and need to know now, the full general history video is available on Patreon for my paid supporters, including both this one and the Charles Johnson episode. I don't enjoy splitting videos, I prefer long-form episodes covering a single topic unto exhaustion, but profit sadly has to be a prime motive for me making these videos, as they are very demanding to produce and I work on them full-time. So I'm trying out different formats here on YouTube to see what gets the most views and ad revenue. If you want to ensure that I can continue covering this period to the extent it deserves, which isn't a guarantee, and profits have been sinking in the recent months, then please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can also watch all of my videos there without ads. If only 1,000 of my regular viewers would donate just $1 a month, this would pretty much guarantee the long-term survival of the channel. Anyway, thank you for listening to my pathetic e-begging, subscribe to my OnlyFans, and I'll see you again soon.